Well, thank you, everybody. Glad you're here. I know you could do 1,000 other things, like heading over to the Sixers game. So thank you for.
It's a waste of time.
So my job is to kind of stay in the background and keep Bill in line. But we're longtime friends, so which has made this little bit challenging to think about how best to have this conversation, because we talk about these issues a lot. And when Bill was writing this book, so he started writing the book, he says, in 1996, to think about how long he's been thinking about a book's worth of these issues. And he's, you know, before we met, I knew of him, of course, further back than many of you. But when I don't quite go back to the Baltimore Sun, but I go back to Ebony, and looking forward to this guy William C. Rhoden writing about sports. So we've been trying to think about. Let's find it. How many of you have ever read the book $40 Million Slaves? So in your free time, students especially, it is a book to still read. I read it again for the first time in 15 years or so. I use it a lot, and I was reading it with this, how Shakespearean are the themes that were introduced in 2006 when the book was published, and it's amazing. One line that jumps out, Bill says, we're looking at a pantheon from Jack Johnson, Tom Molyneux, kind of the first prominent athletes, to LeBron James. Think about, and we're probably still thinking about LeBron in some kinds of ways, but differently, as we've been talking about. So we were trying to think of the best way to frame this, and Bill, before I ask you the one dominating question, maybe you could say what you were trying to convey when you wrote the book 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's a hell of a question. But
read the book.
Yeah. No. But first of all, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's great being here, and particularly here on a nice spring day in Philadelphia, when you could have gone to see the 76ers. But like I said, probably in a better space. You do not want to be disappointed, because that series is over. That's another panel for another day. But you know it. So where could I start? And Ken is right. We've been talking about this over the years, and I think I was reading your books before we met, and you we're kind of on the same wavelength. And when you're in the middle of writing something and somebody does a book, and you're like thinking, damn, man, I should have written that. So just like they said, don't ever, if you're in the middle of writing a book, like don't go into Barnes and Noble, because you're thinking, man, who needs another book, man? But so really the genesis of this, a couple of genesis. So as Ken said, I started working on this book like 1996, 97, and it basically took me like 9 years to write. And every time, and then right after that, I wrote another book right after that called Third and a Mile, which is the trials and tribulations of the black quarterback. So they were kind of back to back. And all I remember, I look at this and I just think of, man, it's like an Autobot experience, man. Just the thing of writing a book. Because I was still writing for the Times, and every assignment, I remember being at Wimbledon, and I leave Wimbledon and go to the British Library. That was kind of like, all of your academic research, your whole life is just every single day. There's no breathing room, and it becomes so much a part of you. It's like, it's where do I end and where does the book begin. It just became, it's almost like one of these books ordained by God. It's like I said, it's like an out-of-body experience. If somebody says, what's the sequel? I get exhausted just thinking about it. Maybe we'll just do a memoir. But what really got me thinking about it when I was working, I was speaking to a middle school class in New York. And the idea of this book was a history lesson and a timeout. So I was speaking to this class during Black History Month, of course, like February. And so at some point I finished talking, and after I finished, this young girl, she raised her hand and said, Mr. Rhoden, that's all well and good, but tell me, who was the first white athlete to integrate the NBA? Now think about that. She asked me, who was the first white athlete to integrate the NBA? And it took me for a loop, because I had to think about it for a while. And at first I was going to say it's ridiculous, but then I realized that in this young girl's life, she was like in middle school, the NBA had always been 80% black. The NFL had always been 60-something% black. So for her, it's always been like that. And I thought for a whole generation of young black kids, and young people in general, there was no sense of how do we get to 60% black? How did you get there? No idea of the sense of struggle. And that not just in sports, but in general. Because if you don't have any idea of what it took to be able to vote, all the blood, the people who were murdered, the killing, the slaughter, all the stuff that led to us being in 2024, or back then it was 19, you have no idea that you have something to fight for if you have no sense of the battle. And so at that point, I thought that what I wanted this book to be at this particular time was sort of a timeout and a history lesson. A timeout, like when you're playing and sometimes the coach will call a timeout. He says, we need to catch our breath. We need to put this stuff in perspective. And that's why I thought as African-American athletes, particularly at that time, we all needed a timeout. How did the hell we get here? I think at this point, when I started doing, Michael Jordan was at the height of his power. And I reserved a chapter just for him. I said, man, it was kind of like what you could have done. In fact, we were just talking before he came over here. We were trying to put who to put on the burner, and we were thinking about Rodney King, which happened in 1991, to George Floyd, which happened in 2020. And what was Michael Jordan's reaction in 1991 and LeBron James's reaction in 2020, and even before that with the young brother who's before that killed Miami, Trayvon. Yeah. And we just thought about the two reactions. Michael's reaction, 1991, was kind of like, I don't want to deal with that at all. I just want to play ball and make a lot of money. And you fast forward to LeBron, who basically led a charge. So I thought that was, so the long-winded way of answering that is I wanted this to be a history lesson. One of the things I like about the book, although you mentioned that it's still, I can't believe it's going to be 20 years at some point. What I liked about the book, there were certain historical chapters, kind of like establishing the ground game. The first 8 chapters were history, and that's not going to change. 100 years from now, Jackie Robinson will still have integrated baseball. 100 years from now, Jack Johnson will still have won the heavyweight championship of the world. So the foundation of the history is what's important, and then my kind of take on it.
So as you're saying this, two other things that are important, those who read the book will know this. A lot of the book is autobiographical, and one of the things we compare with our lives is Bill went to Morgan State, went to an HBCU, played football there, and I went to Stanford and had a less glorious career, but kind of that moment of decision of, do you go to an HBCU or now we can go, which is a whole other piece of it, to predominantly white institutions. But the title that you almost gave to the book, Lost Tribe Wandering, and you carry a lot of, you didn't give it the title, but you still carry that a lot.
Well, that was the idea of just this lost tribe, just sort of a lost tribe wandering. That was sort of my imagery of this, particularly if you follow the history of how we got to this point and everything it took to get to this point. And then you sort of, and I use a lot of sort of biblical epigrams, using sort of the Exodus as sort of the theme of it. And to me, if you, again, we repeat this, but if you don't know, and you run it, if you don't really know the history of stuff, I kind of compared it to, and I was asking these couple of young brothers who play, and they were saying, somebody said, man, why are you always talking about history? I said, your coach, you spend about 80% of your time, most athletes spent about 80% of their time watching film. And you watch film. Now, the film doesn't have anything to do with the future. Everything you're watching has to do with last week's game, last year's game, last week's practice. Why do you think your coach has you spending so much time watching the past if it doesn't matter? Well, why? Because they want you to find out the mistakes you made. Oh, that's what I did. Every time he does this, I do that. That's why I lose. And I said, that's why they want you to watch film. That's kind of what this is. It's kind of game film. How do we make the same mistakes over and over and over again? And if you don't watch game film, you're doomed to repeat the same stuff. And after you tell them that, they say, oh yeah, that's why history is important. It's watching game film, it's correcting yourself. And now, I know you're going to ask me this later, but I'm just running off with a mouth. But
so far you're on track, so it's okay.
All right, well that will change soon. But I was thinking, I'm going to start the end, because I'll let you ask the question. But so we're talking about this journey and the struggle and all that. I remember I was at an NBA game. By the way, who I write for now is ESPN Andscape. It's one of the Andscape, an ESPN vertical, and our job is to do the that they don't want to do, cover the kind of stuff, I'll write the columns they ain't gonna write, that's what Andscape's job is. And it's really a great, if you're not hip to it, it's really a great website. I left the Times in 2016 and immediately started there. And the thing they said we'll also do is create a fellowship. Shout out to Disney. We'll create a fellowship in your name, and that's the Rhoden Fellows. And what the Rhoden Fellows is, as Ken said, while he was basking at Stanford, I was struggling at Morgan. But so what the fellowship does is every year, we just named our 8th class of fellows. Every year we select 6 students from HBCUs, and they get a 1-year paid fellowship to basically produce content. And basically, I'll teach them all the stuff not to do, So we were talking about the stuff. So when we were talking about this conversation a year ago, 2 years ago, I was at an NBA playoff game, and it just occurred to me, I was sitting, watched the game. It was Phoenix somebody, and it just hit me. I said, man, these brothers are really happy. Everybody's happy. It just don't, because I was still thinking the struggle. I said, man, these guys are happy. Everybody's happy. We just come out of the George Floyd thing, when they let the football battle, write stuff on their sneakers and write stuff, racism on kind of like, all right, we'll let y'all, if y'all play, just play. Y'all can write on the end zone and do whatever, just play. And so they did that. We kind of got through that. And then 4 years after that, man, it's kind of like it never happened. Everybody is happy. And I think it becomes when money is the highest value in the society, which it is here, clearly, money has become the highest value in our society. And when money is the highest value in your society, all bets are off. Morality, what you believe in, because everything can be purchased at a price. And I think that's kind of where we are. Again, you didn't ask, but So we were talking about Kaepernick, and just this last Super Bowl, I was Malcolm Jenkins, who's a Philadelphia Eagle formerly. You know, we're going to talk about Kaepernick, but I had never seen NFL owners be as not off put, but not they weren't intimidated, but they were with the protest. I'd never seen owners be as off put and almost intimidated as they were when these brothers in the NFL were kneeling, because they didn't know, they couldn't control it. You know, these cats were like, they kneeling and they were pleading with these cats, could you please stop, you know, because we're losing money. And for me, at my age and my experience, you know, from Ali to Kurt Flood to Wilma Rudolph, to all these black athletes who had taken stands, and then, you know, you jump to Kaepernick, it was almost exciting and exhilarating to see that. And then what they did, and this kind of gets back to money being the highest value, they basically, what will it take to get you to stop? So Malcolm's group, they formed this thing called the Players Coalition. And the Players Coalition became essentially the self-appointed bargaining group with the owners, right? And basically the owners came up with a figure, you know, and the figure was about 32 million, which when you think about it, there are 32 NFL teams. And everybody could, those owners could take out $1 million out their wallet, which is like no money. But 32 million is a cheap price to get these cats to stop. And that's what they did. They bargained with the Players Coalition led by Malcolm Jenkins and the wide receiver who was not playing, Antoine Bolt. Yeah. And basically, they gave them $32 million to give to whatever charities or whatever and stop fucking kneeling. And I just remember they did it, they took it, and I remember the next day or 2 days later, Malcolm announced that, okay, I'm no longer protesting. I mean, he just said it because they had the money, we're no longer protesting, and I saw him at the Super Bowl because he's doing a book tour. I guess he's coming here, right? So, you know, but I asked him at the book thing, that I was writing a column about, I said, man, I got to tell you, I mean, I respect you and all that, but do you think that you killed the movement? Because with all due respect, you know, I think that was the death of athlete activism. When you guys took the money and you announced the next day that we're done protesting, in the owner's mind, everything that came after that was bullshit. They didn't care. All we wanted y'all to do is stop kneeling. And if it took 32 million, each owner gives $1 million, that's worth more than enough. So relative to this conversation and the sequel or whatever, I just realized that was probably like the end of it. The end of, you know, yeah. I don't know what you think about that.
No. So we got kind of stuck talking about this age of happiness. Yeah. That this is a moment where, you know, if you think about athlete activism.
I'm sorry for cursing, by the way. I'm a sports writer, so occasionally I'll try to, it is religious.
He's
school,
just recording it. But for
Shropshire, y'all bring this.
But for athlete activism, it's usually you get caught up in whatever the moment is. You mentioned, you know, George Floyd or whatever the event might be. We look for athletes to get involved, and now we see what's going on in the campuses. Yeah, I mean, other than Kyrie, there's not a whole lot of athlete engagement there. So, you know, so I do want to a couple of things I want to get to. I mean, one is just broadly. Well, what would the next chapter be? Would it be called Happiness?
Yeah. That's actually a good title.
I do want to talk about Reggie Bush. I mean, this moment. What does that mean in this whole pantheon? Yeah. And then, I'll get so sick. The Caitlyn effect.
Yeah, those are three things to get to. Definitely Caitlin Clark. We need to get to that too. Because actually that would be part, if you were going to write the next chapter,
right.
which by the way, if I would have written it by now. But the next chapter would probably have, and you bring up Reggie Bush, something that's been phenomenal is the liberation of college athletes. It's something that we probably never thought would happen. You played football at Stanford, I was going to Morgan, and a lot of what we wrote was about how athletes in college, particularly at Power 5 schools, were basically on this plantation. You know, where these people, coaches were making lots of money. The coaches had everything, and the athletes basically had nothing. And I wrote a lot of the stories about athletes who had their careers ruined because of taking impermissible, what they call extra benefits.
Right.
I wrote a lot of those stories about young brothers who were going off to, and not so much sisters because the money wasn't that great, but a lot of brothers who were going off like the UNLV, place like Michigan, you know, Chris Webber, the Fab Five, all these guys who were, you know, who could not get money to like put gas in their car or to go on a date or whatever. It was like they were made to feel dirty by taking impermissible benefits. And, you know, Reggie Bush, same thing. They took this guy's Heisman Trophy away because now everything they were doing is now with NIL is legal. There's no penalties. You can give people, all these big schools are getting collectives, Alabama, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, they're raising like almost $1 billion of money to above board give people money. The same thing that got Reggie Bush banned and other people banned is now fine. So I thought it was great that finally the NCAA said they realized they were wrong. Forget the legal word. I don't know. It's not reparations. It's not when you basically right a wrong.
Restitution.
It could be restitution. Reformation. Pamela is on. UPenn, long time friend. She actually went to, anyway. So, but yeah, and so to me,
so this
that would be an extra.
This
that
is
would
the
be
happiness chapter too. Then
it's
Reggie
happy.
Bush is now happy.
Yeah, well, I don't think he's happy because he was probably pissed for a long time. I don't know, when you spend 10 years in prison when you shouldn't, and they let you out, I don't think you're happy, right? I don't think it's happy. You get justice. So Reggie Bush has gotten justice, and I think the NCAA should do the same thing. Chris Webber, to this day, Chris Webber, they erased any mention of his name from the record book in Michigan. They took down his jersey, and they made millions of dollars at Michigan off the Fab Five. He'd go in the bookstore, and they had his jersey number, all those guys. Yeah. They had the jersey numbers without his name, and he didn't get any of that money. And so now that they've opened the door to giving Bush back his trophy. So anyway, I think the next chapter, I think that whole idea of liberation for athletes, college athletes, would be a chapter. And the second one would be black women. I did a chapter here called Ain't I a Woman, about black women. But I think black women have become, I think, a powerful force now. And ironically, and this kind of goes into the Caitlyn Jenner thing, what's a little troubling is that the same kind of power dynamic you see happening with men, where men tote the barge and tote that barge, lift that bale, where the white coaches and white ADs reap all the benefits. You're kind of seeing the same thing now with women and the WNBA, and even with Caitlin Clark. And there's no disrespect to her, but we've all seen the Caitlin Clark hype, which is good. She earned it. She's good. She gets signed to a WNBA contract. She becomes the fourth woman to get her own shoe. Well, but all four of the women are white. The league is like almost 60-something% black women. And you had great WNBA players, but the people they think are marketable are these four white women. Now, that's the great white hope syndrome. And the thing I respect about Caitlin Clark is that she's not necessarily, it's us, it's the media. We're the ones who do it. She's not, she just wants to play basketball. Just like the guy Jokic at Denver. I wrote a similar column about him last year when it's kind of like the Tarzan thing. Whenever you have a white athlete dominating a black sport, that's when that kicks in. Jokic doesn't care. He's from, where are you, Yugoslavia? He doesn't care. He's just playing ball. But it's the predominantly white media surrounding him that feeds into this whole Tarzan syndrome, where we've got to make it more than what it is. I don't care. I'll give you it, but just don't make it more. Why does it have to go off the chart? So those two things would be, I think, the chapter phenomenon. I mean, you look at women. Dawn Staley now. I just wrote. I hate doing this, but I'll do it. I just wrote a column. I hate people do that, but we're in this era of shamelessness. Really, and I'm just kind of late getting to the party. It's like shamelessness. And I said, man, what did B.B. King said? He said, if this is the way life has got to be, I'm going to do the same thing they've been doing to me. But I was writing this column about black male coaches. So recently, John Calipari left the University of Kentucky to go to Arkansas. Arkansas. And so, I listen to radio a lot. I listen to, a lot of radio. When it's NFL season, I listen to what everybody's saying. Each season, just to hear what these people are talking about. And so, when he left, I was listening to all the speculation. That's what we do. We speculate who's going to replace him at Kentucky. And it was one white coach after the other. One white coach after the other. There wasn't one black coach who they mentioned who could be his replacement. It was like one white coach, a guy at the Final Four. There's a brother, Keats, from North Carolina State, who just took North Carolina State to the Final Four. His name wasn't mentioned. Calvin Sampson, who's Native American, but he identifies as a brother. Nobody's name was mentioned. So it got me to thinking, okay, Rhoden, before you jump on it, what names, give us some names. And so I called Tommy Amaker at Harvard, who keeps track of all this stuff. And so we talked, he gave me, he reminded me, there were like 9 or 10 really outstanding young black coaches. We got a deep bench. So I actually wrote a column about that. We have a deep bench. The issue is that it's a deeper bench because I thought that, so my frame of reference is John Thompson, John Chaney, your own John Chaney here, Nolan Richardson. Those guys were loud. You would think that there was a deeper bench of black coaches because they were just so loud. And in fact, there wasn't a deep bench. They were just really loud. There's a deeper bench now. The problem is nobody has a voice. You got a lot of coaches, but nobody has a voice. The most powerful voice now is Dawn Staley at South Carolina. She is now what Thompson, Chaney, and Richardson were. She's now got that voice. And so, but that feeds into, and Dawn talks about everything. She talks about black women, women of color. She even talks about the acceptance of transgender people. And so she's a very powerful voice, but that's where I was going with that. But that would be that would have been the next chapter about the power of women, the power of black women, and the dilemma of black women. And I think that women, it gets back to your happiness thing. The guys are really happy, and there's no sense of mission at all. There's no sense of mission at all. I think the women have a sense of mission because of what they're trying to do to the women's game, the WNBA. There is a sense of mission. And I think that's really important. We have a sense of mission. But the dilemma is that, okay, there's a sense of mission, but don't do that same stuff with Caitlin and all. I mean, I get it, but don't, you have a lot of black women who are great, who've been great in the WNBA. I understand that we're trying to use Caitlin Clark to build this thing, but let's change the paradigm. Let's make it kind of even. So to answer your question, 20 minutes later. The chapter would be the freedom, the black big-time college athletes sort of liberated,
right,
and the efficacy of black women. So it'd probably be 2 chapters there, because I think that's through there you could really see a struggle that I think with the guys, and you know, with the guy, they, you know, and I guess just last thing, when I mentioned how money has become the highest value, I was having dinner. I just became a grandfather a couple months ago, and we were talking about over dinner with my daughter and my son-in-law. And so I was saying, what is the source of your optimism? His name is Kasi. That Kasi bear, that Kasi is going to, what's your sense of optimism to bring this new life in, given everything that's happened? You know, potentially, depending on how this presidential race comes, it could just be yet another nightmare, you know. But what's your sense of optimism, given everything? And he said, well, you know, he said the source of optimism is that, you know, he's going to have resources. We're going to give him resources. He's going to be resourced. And when I thought about that, I liked that, obviously, for his sake, my daughter's sake, but I think that's kind of where we are. Like, money is the highest value. If you got resources, doesn't matter what tyrannical people occupy the White House. If you have resources, some kind of way you could buy your way out of it, because money is the highest value, even over the racism and the sex. If you could buy your way out of it, you'll be okay. And if you don't want to be poor here. You don't want to not have resources here. It has to do with medical care, I mean, across the board. So that's what I was saying with cats who are athletes, and they're making more money, shucks. They're making, this is $40 million slaves. You know, the idea is wealth doesn't mean power. You have a lot of guys, for the most part, making a lot of money. And if you think about it, I mean, making a lot of money. We tend to take it for granted, yeah, but it's a lot of money. I mean, and you think about, man, you know, you get this money and I wipe out student debt for like 10 members of my family, set up that kind of stuff. And that, I think, can trump, sorry, I didn't mean to use that word. that could co-opt your sense of morality. And I think that that's what we're seeing with the flip side of name, image, and likeness. With, like I said, the chapter would be about the liberation. The problem is that a lot of these young cats, and I talked to them at the NFL draft, and they're making a lot of money. Young cats making a lot of money. And I think, that has eroded the sense of education, because they're chasing the money. They're not chasing necessarily the degree. Also, I think it's eroded the sense of mission in terms of like even playing for a black coach. Like one guy said, yeah, I'll play for a black coach if he's got the right NIL deal. So again, that to me, so I like the idea that young athletes are making money, but I think as that's become the highest value, it's more important than getting a degree. It's more important than taking a stand, because you may take a stand. You mentioned the protest on campus. And I've been thinking about this. I said, man, this is a very complicated time to be a student athlete, because there's so much on your plate and there's no safety net. So anyway, that's the answer to that question.
Well, you know, and I want to, the thing that haunts the book all the way through, you start off, so we got this happiness thing now. So you think, and there have been a few times in the book where there's some degree of happiness in terms of the progression of the black athlete. But you start off the book with, you start off with boxing, but you talk about the story of the black jockey. Yeah. And that's where that phrase, the jockey syndrome comes in. Well, why don't you talk about that a little bit, so anybody that's optimistic, this will bring you back to reality.
By the way, can I do it? So brother asked, she said, well, what you reading? And so I said, number one, this is Ken's book. This is Uncle Tom's Copy. Speaking about conversation.
Which ties in some.
It kind of somewhat ties into this in a way, you know. But yeah, the jockey syndrome, you know, jockeys were, there was a time when black jockeys ruled horse racing. It was kind of like it was kind of like the NBA is now. If you had black jockeys, I'm giving stats, and I know I'm on camera, I'm probably giving the wrong stats, but black jockeys won something like 10 of the first 12 Kentucky Derbies, probably more than that. But black jockeys were the preeminent athletic force in this country. When horse racing was the thing, black jockeys dominated. You had black jockeys like Isaac Murphy, who was making 3 times the amount of money as white jockeys. I mean, you had black jockeys who were talking trash. I mean, it was funny. It was almost like the NBA back then. And so they were a very powerful force when horse racing was the big thing in our industry. Well, once it became lucrative, the white power structure decided we got to end this. So what they did when it was time to relicense, they changed the whole way of licensing jockeys. So every jockey had to be relicensed. Well, guess who systematically was not relicensed? Black jockeys. So within a matter of 10 years, what had been this dominant force was basically, just like that, was eliminated. And so when I refer to the jockey, so the same thing happened to black men in the NFL. When the NFL first started, back in 1920, you had some black players. Same thing with baseball. 1895, you had some black players. But when it was decided that we want to basically, you're taking jobs from white people, they made these gentlemen agreements where black folks were automatically done, eliminated, no more. Football, you wouldn't have any football players until 1948. Baseball, you didn't have any more black baseball players until Jackie Robinson. Just because overnight the people owned it. If you don't own it, you don't own it. You just rent it, you know. And they basically eliminated us. And so I said, well, okay, so here we are 2024. And that's why I kind of am sensitive to the whole, what I call the Great White Hope thing. Because I'm always looking at that. And remember, I told you the young lady said, when she asked me, the 6th grader asked, who was the first white player to integrate the NBA? Because she thought that it had always been like that. And what I was trying to tell the young guys, that don't think that people are happy about this, the fact that you guys are 70% of the NFL and 70% of the NBA, because that will not always have to be the case. If you were just, and again, that gets back into studying game film. You know they've done this before. They know they've just taken stuff from you, whether it's our land, whether it's position. Don't think they can't do it again. And don't get it in your mind that because, you know, you're playing in front of all these white people that they like this. They just can't replace you. But that's why when they say a Luka Doncic or whatever, or Caitlin Clark, you know, it becomes more than what it is, than what it should be. So the jockey syndrome was basically about don't get it twisted. If they can replace you, they will. But don't take this for granted that you are this numeric, because the whole numeric dominance is, if you look at the scheme of things, it's not a long period of time. It's not been that long. So there's a part of me that says, you know, if you talk to young guys, they say, oh, come on, Mr. Rhoden, you know, you're always talking this racial man. And, you know, when I was interviewing Grant for the book, they need us. I said, yeah, well, that's what Isaac Murphy thought. With the black jacket, they need us. And within 15 years, you guys are history and not heard of since. So the genesis of the jockey syndrome was the idea of moving the goalposts. And I guarantee you, probably every person in this classroom who's either an African American or a person of color, you've seen some element of them moving the goalposts. Just when you think that you figured it out, oh, no, it was a first down then, it's not a first down now. It was a touchdown then, but it ain't a touchdown now. They can move the goalposts. So what do you think about that?
So let me throw in one more combination question. Then I want to open it up for other folks to ask stuff. So this one you may or may not want to deal with this, but I definitely want to talk about ownership. But the other thing, when we first began talking about what we were going to talk about, OJ passed away. So we were going to make this the OJ conversation.
Yeah.
Because OJ's played such, in that timeline of the black athlete, such a pivotal role. I mean, his prime time was probably 1968. I mean, that's probably when he, and all this other stuff is going on. But if there's anything about OJ you want to put out there, yeah, but
yeah.
Which is also, well, OJ.
Yeah, OJ. Yeah. And I guess the advantage of being older, seasoned, is that you know all these people. So when I worked for Ebony magazine, one of the first major pieces I did was on OJ. You know, me and Ozir Muhammad, who's a great friend. Since we were great friends, Ozir's gone. He's won 2 Pulitzers as a photographer. So we went to Buffalo to do this piece on O.J. Simpson. This was like 1974, 75, you know. And, you know, back then he was still married to a black woman, you know, Marguerite. They had 2 black kids. And O.J. loved to play bid whisk. So for me, I'm thinking, man, his brother plays bid whisk. Yeah. How many of y'all know bid whisk, by the way? I take for it. No, some people don't. This generation, some people play spades. Play that. Yeah, it's not either or, right? So, but somebody, I was on this show a couple of weeks ago, like, you know, as you get older and the older people die, they'll have you on the CBS more told with the old people. Right. And so I was on CBS with Gail King. There was a white guy who was an anchor. And I kind of lightened the segment up by saying, yeah, the thing that tipped me to OJ, was that he played bid whisk. And people be like, the white guy was, bid whisk, what's that? I said, oh man, you gotta have another segment. That's this cat. But I saw from, you know, OJ was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. Remember, the thing about OJ was he's this racially neutral guy. He famously told, I think Jay-Z has a line in one of his things that, I'm not black, I'm OJ. So that's where OJ was coming from. And we got into it a little bit then. He said, you know, nobody's going to, as a black man, nobody can tell me where I'm going to live, blah, blah, blah. So OJ was the first racially neutral guy. Then Stanford, what he stood for was celebrity. You know, that's what he stood. He didn't stand for but OJ and celebrity. You know, and then you had Michael Jordan took it to another level. You know, and I guess the reason I was so hard, and then OJ also had a lot of control in that organization. He had power, but he wasn't about to use that power for anything that would benefit black people. That was not his thing, you know. I was gonna say, did I think he killed? Well, we won't get into what I think he did it or not. I do think about, there's nobody I know who can do that, you know. But so I guess my prism of evaluating black people, of athletes, is if you look at the continuum, you know, Jack Johnson, independent. Now, Jack Johnson wasn't necessarily, he was telling black folks and white folks, I'm my own man. He told black folks, don't y'all with me, and he told white folks. You know, his famous thing was, I kind of use this sometime. He said, yeah, I'm black. Y'all never let me forget it. I'm black. I'll never let you forget it. But it was about how it affected, and Bill Russell was kind of like that too. Kind of the blackness was how it affected me, because I couldn't buy the house here. It wasn't like this where I think we are today, where it's less collective than individual. So, but my frame of reference was, you know, kind of like a Joe Louis. My father-in-law told me this story about Joe Louis. My father-in-law was a lieutenant in the Army, you know, the black part of the Army. And they were playing cards with Joe Louis. And you know, the thing you get with Joe Louis is that, you know, he's not necessarily literate and all that. He was just not out, you know. But everybody, like, he was my father's guy. You know, in that generation, Joe Louis was my dad's guy. But so my father told me the story. They were playing cards in the barracks. Joe Louis, who was a sergeant, and 3 other officers. And so the white guys, the white soldiers, were having a dance in the barracks. So the white soldiers came in while they played cards. Say, Joe, come on, we want you to come over to the white barracks. I mean, not the white barracks. We want you to come over to the dance. They want to show them off. So Joe Louis was dealing. So he put his cards down. He told his boy, come on, let's go. They said, no, Joe, just you. So Joe Louis sat back down, grabbed his card, and said, deal. And to me, that said a whole lot about Joe Louis. At his core, he was a black man. At his core, did not get it twisted. Those officers came in and said, come on, Joe. And he said, oh, come on, guys, because he was going to bring his guys in. And when they said, no, just you, he just sat back down, picked up his car and said, deal. That was chilling. So when you go to, Muhammad Ali was that kind of person. Again, and I'm speaking from my particular age group. You know, I'm like a teenager, and here's a guy like Muhammad Ali, and you know, there's a draft, and we talked about that. We're getting drafted, the war, it was Vietnam. I mean, it was awful. You know, I had a lot of classmates who were getting drafted and all that. And so for Ali to basically, when they threatened to take his title, and he basically said, you can take the title, I'm not getting drafted. And so it introduced the idea of principle to me. So that was sort of my framework on what any black person who assumes any type of prominence, at the end of the day, that's kind of your allegiance. You don't have to. Michael Jordan doesn't have to do shit. I mean, that's why people would march. That's what Dr. King and Malcolm would do. So he wouldn't have to do anything, and he did not, you know. But so the thing, Wilma Rudolph, one of the greatest runners of all time, she came back from the 1960 Olympics. The people in Rome loved her. And she came back, and her term, she was born in Tennessee, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Not wrong, don't quote me, but they wanted to give her a parade for doing so well in the Olympics. But it was going to be a segregated banquet. And so Wilma Rudolph told the mayor of the city, said, no, I'm not doing that. Unless it's an integrated affair, I'm not doing it. And a lot of people didn't know it, but Wilma Rudolph did that. It was unpublicized acts of heroism, which is really important. So that was sort of my frame of reference. And you go through OJ, then you go through Jordan, and you really didn't see anything until LeBron and Kaepernick. You know, they were kind of old school in that it was about principle and sacrifice. And then you had Malcolm Jenkins. So, you know, I know he's a former Philadelphia Eagle. You know.
Why don't we open it up until I'm told we don't have any more time. So, yes.
Really quickly, as a piggyback on the O.J. conversation, I had no idea until watching the 30 for 30 first episode last night, the new one on O.J. Simpson, that he had a child who died in a pool accident.
Right.
And I just feel like out of all the conversation about O.J., what part of that do you remember from living through it at that moment? I was just a kid, you know?
Yeah.
In terms of like how that might have impacted him from a trauma standpoint, because I did see in the 30 for 30, have to pause it to read the article, that it was, he was out of town and his wife.
Marguerite.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was traumatic. I mean, I remember just because, you know, I knew him and knew her and all that. And I never spoke to him about that, but I mean, just imagine everybody has children and imagine that what your children drive. And I think they got divorced shortly after that. Yeah. So I've got to imagine. And also I think that OJ probably may have had some CTE, you know, because remember, he took a lot of blows to the head. But back when he was playing, that was not a thing. Like CTE was not a thing. I'm not forgiving anything, but what you mentioned.
You can't forgive anything, but I mean, like, I wrote about him for a small part of my dissertation. I just didn't see that. Like, by the time it was post the death of Nicole Kidman and her partner, you didn't hear that talk.
Right.
I just didn't even know it. And so I'm just wondering, as a mom myself,
Right.
Yeah.
of three, what it means to kind of be this star standout for campus, America's favorite, if you will, right? College athlete, black athlete anyway, and then to lose a child and suddenly fall into this narrative of like, I'm not black, I'm OJ.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to get above trauma.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And who knows, but you can't, at the very least, you know, that had to have a devastating impact on both him and Marguerite, and probably his kids too.
Yeah.
by the way. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate those, that Joe Lewis anecdote, hope it was bid whist, and the Wilbur Rudolph story. So I'm looking forward to a Bill Rhoden book of stories of unheralded acts of heroism. But my question is, I really appreciate what you said about the happiness era and the loss of the sense of mission. I'm wondering if what's going on with a lot of colleges with respect to the war on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially at colleges and universities down south. Maybe that might provide some sort of platform for athletes, football players, whatever, to regain that sense of mission.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because again, as you get older, you always have to be careful of being that person who's saying, "Get off my lawn," being the old person, "Get off my lawn." So for me to say these kids have no sense of mission, if there were some young athletes here, they might say, we do have a sense of mission, not necessarily my sense of mission, but it could be this war on DEI. Or how do you feel about the acceptance of transgender athletes? The only problem is they're not going to get, the whole DEI war, like even with DeSantis in Florida, there's a DEI except the Florida football team. We're not, you could pull rank, but we're going to keep the Florida football and basketball team black, So maybe, athletes tend to be kind of in a cocoon. They tend to be in their own, when I say they, at the Power 5 making money level. They tend to be kind of over here. They're treated differently. They don't get the same treatment as somebody else because they're making money. So, but that you raise a good point, and it's probably something worth. What is it that would turn the contemporary athlete around? And unfortunately, I think for us, it has to be something horrific, like George Floyd. We got to see George Floyd murder. We react really well to that. When we can all band together about something like that. But I was even thinking in terms of, supporting Palestine. It's such I was thinking this, it's so beautiful to be at these college campuses because this is a perfect learning opportunity to find out, to really go into your political science class. So, okay, let me learn about this. Let me get to the roots of this really complicated story. That's why you're at Alabama and all these schools. They've got these great political science departments where you could actually say, I really need to learn about this stuff. So if I do want to use my visibility to make a stand, I kind of know what I'm talking about. That was Kyrie's problem, is that he just said but he didn't really know what he was talking about. But I'm not saying if he would have just had time and studied, he could have actually given everybody a lesson. This is what I'm saying, watch it, this is issue, so, yeah.
I'm wondering, did you ever interrogate when Craig Hodges? Craig Hodges when he
Yeah. He's in the book.
And here's my understanding that he went to Magic and Michael Jordan and other stars to protest to sit out the All-Star game and protest, and they refused to do it.
Yeah.
So did you ever talk to Craig?
I talked to Craig a lot about that. We didn't say. The irony is that he came to Michael about something else. I forget what it was, but Michael basically told him to get lost. But ironically, and this kind of shows where we all are. Everybody. If you got a job and somebody else is paying your salary, you really have to be circumspect before you jump out there. Whether it's me working at Disney or ESPN, you have to be real about it. And when I spoke to Craig later, he had a son who was an assistant coach somewhere. And I wanted to talk to Craig about something I was writing, and I wanted him to kind of jump out there. And he said, man, I don't want to do that right now because my son is trying to get this job. And I said, see? I didn't say see, but it was like, we have to understand, man. It's kind of like everybody, unless you own all of it, and I don't even know what that even looks like, everybody's accountable to somebody, which makes sacrifice so profound when you decide, when you are an Ali or Kaepernick, and you know the consequences are going to be you're never going to play in the NFL again. You know, Curt Flood is a guy who, Curt Flood basically gave up his entire career so that, everybody's heard the term free agency. Well, Curt Flood is the one who basically gave up his career so that there could be free agency. But the guy told him, if you do this, you're not going to get in the Hall of Fame. Your career is over. But it was the ultimate sacrifice. And I guess as I've gotten older and talk about this kind of stuff, before I'm getting on guys to walk out or do this, I mean, you have to be really practical, because for a lot of guys, they're making money, and this is, for them, generational wealth. And to ask somebody, particularly if I'm not going to give you any more money, I'm just writing. You go out and do it, But so there's, yeah.
I wanted you to touch on the fact that your colleague David Aldridge wrote a column about the NBA players being screamed and hollered about from the fans about you didn't cover my bet. So sports betting has now become a huge impact on sports, period, where the leagues take 2% from every sports betting operator. Now you have Shohei Ohtani's interpreter stating that,
So-called.
that we didn't have, and so I think we're trying to save more time, but the point I'm trying to make is the mystery is why do you think there's only black athletes promoting sports betting apps? I think Drew Brees is the only white one I've seen in the past 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers about that. I couldn't tell. What I will say about your general question, which I think is an important question. I'm not going to answer your, because I don't really know the black-white dynamic of who's promoting what. But when you talked about, see, this kind of gets back to the thing of when money becomes the highest value. When money becomes the highest value, the NBA will jump into bed with gambling. The NFL will jump in bed with gambling. Major League Baseball will jump in bed with gambling because it's money. And now you've got all this moral fallout. And you're wondering why you've got athletes who are kind of compromised. But money is the highest value. So whether it's Ohtani, I don't have any inside information. I'm certainly not going to say it. But, you've had Ohtani in the NBA. They just got rid of, who's the player? Yeah, they've got, Porter. Not his brother, but his younger brother. So I don't know the specific answer to the black-white dynamic.
David Aldridge's article in the Andscape was about players now having to endure fans screaming at them about you didn't cover my bet.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, but the same thing, and I know we got to roll. But yes, but also even with the fantasy thing, before it was gambling, they were taking the same kind of heat from people who had fantasy teams because you didn't cover. Because not just so you didn't cover, but you were hurting my fantasy team. So it's kind of the same thing. The gambling, I know some people have actually gotten threats. There was a coach who a player who actually he was threatened because he didn't cover. So it's kind of going in a bad direction. And I guess I'm waiting to find out. I think that we're probably in for a huge scandal because there's too much money and there are too many people, like the 15th guy on the team, who's got information about too much stuff that people are calling him. That's what happened to Porter's brother. He was feeding information to gamblers. And if you just think he's the only one, things don't happen like that. It's just like he's the only one. It didn't work like the referee who spent money who got sent to prison. Like he's the only one. It doesn't work like that. They say, okay, you will be the fall guy, you'll be a scapegoat. So I just think that, I think what we love, what we enjoy about sports is that it's unscripted drama. But when that does not become the case, all of a sudden that's scripted too. I don't know, man. I don't know.
So unfortunately, we have run out of time. Yeah, you gotta catch a plane. I'll remind you, but closing bow on anything else you want to say before we do close out?
Well, thank you everybody for indulging me and listening to my foul language. But it's nothing personal. It's stimulating. I enjoy us being able to we used to do this podcast called Old Heads, New Thoughts. And we just kind of, you can't find it anymore. But no, I just appreciate the opportunity to talk and ruminate. And it's still a work in progress. I mean, the next book, whatever it's going to be, is still a work in progress. And these kind of conversations are great food for thought, So thank you, thank the Institute, and go Sixers. But I'm telling you, don't waste your time.
All right, thank you, Bill.